tell you about something new that is taking place and is going to be launching next week. So over the course of the last couple of years, we've been praying into thinking about how do we broaden the message? How do we broaden the communication, the things that we're talking about to our larger community? How do we address some of the questions that we as pastors have been getting during this time, etc.? And so next week, you are going to see launched a brand new ministry from Dalhousie Church called Brew House. Now, Brew House is talking about coffee, not the other kind of brew. Coffee brew. How many of you like coffee? Well, those of you that don't, there's still time to get saved. But in all honesty, Brew House is about, we're going to be talking about coffee. We're going to be making fun of coffee. We're going to be making fun of people like me that are coffee snobs. And we're also going to introduce you to some great coffee. We're using that as a segue to this conversation we're calling Faith Talks. And basically what we're doing is we've planned out a year series of podcast and video cast where we are going to be addressing some of the questions that we have been asked. And so we're going to be doing that in the first 8 weeks. We're going to have some guests coming in that are going to be helping us deal with that, some people that you know and some people that you don't know that will be coming in and helping address maybe some of the questions that they're asking during this time. Then in the second quarter, we're going to talk about how faith informs those answers, because we have to be informed by something. Nobody lives in a bubble or a vacuum and develops their thoughts in isolation. We develop them together, and there's things that inform us. So how does faith inform that? Then the third quarter, we're going to talk about how do we start moving that into relationship, and then we're going to start talking in the fourth quarter about the greater picture of what maybe Dalhousie can launch into. So anyway, so it's exciting. You will get a link sent out to you, some information. Those of you that like podcasting, you're going to be able to get that on iTunes and some other stuff. Hopefully Spotify, I think, is one of them that we're talking about, because I'm a big Spotify guy. So if I want to listen to myself, I need to be there. Hint, hint. Video cast, you'll be able to catch it on the webpage and on YouTube. So a lot of exciting things. We will have, I'm going to be teaching an Equip You course that will be starting in October. It's going to be covering a verse-by-verse exegesis and theology around the book of Mark. And it's going to be very extensive, and it's going to be used by, if you want, your small groups or your own personal devotion, etc. So that is going to be launching in October. We have a new counselor named Melissa that we'll be introducing to you as well, that's going to be doing our Restore Yous. We're going to be doing them in a couple of different ways that I think is going to ensure maybe better buy-in and success. Brendan, have I missed anything? I see you. Okay, good. Whew. A lot going on, church. A lot of exciting things. And so our ultimate hope is that people will enter into faith and into relationship with Jesus through all of this. That's our deep hope, is it not? So we are starting a new sermon series today called Verses. Now, not the verses that you find in Scripture, but verses like against. And I know that that's hard for us to think about, being against something or against ideas, because technically we want to be for people. We want to be for people like Jesus was for people. However, following Jesus is going to put us into situations where we're going to have to deal with some realities around economics, ideas around religion. I love one definition of religion I heard is that the difference between Jesus and religion is that Jesus is all about fellowship, and religion is the micromanagement of how that should look. And so we're going to talk some about that. We're going to be talking about cultural issues. And sometimes in our following of Jesus, there is no other way, there is no way around the fact that we are going to be put into a versus situation. Jesus himself encountered this. It doesn't take long when you read the Gospels to see that Jesus himself found himself in situations that he was versus something. We can see this clearly in the Gospels when you look at, for instance, Jesus and the Sabbath. Everybody thought in that culture, in that time, that what? Men were meant for the Sabbath. But Jesus comes along and says, no, Sabbath is meant for men. And remember, he was healing people on the Sabbath. And that put him into a versus situation with those who weren't for that. We also know that Jesus was put into versus situations when he would sit down and he would eat with people that others thought weren't worthy to be sharing meals with. As a matter of fact, they actually said to one of the disciples, he said, why is Jesus eating with some of the worst kinds of sinners? Jesus, following a set of values, was put into a versus situation. Even with his own followers, he was put into versus situations. Remember the story where Jesus turns to his disciples and he basically says to them, how much longer am I going to have to put up with you? Don't you get it? Because there was this conflict happening within his followers of, well, Jesus is saying one thing and yet my instinct is saying something different, or my culture may be saying something different, or my family, my friends, etc., may be saying something different than what Jesus is. And we see that we're put into a versus situation. We see that he was also put into situations against political leadership and also against cultural taboos. One of the stories that jumps out in my mind is the time in John chapter 4 where Jesus is sitting at a well talking to a woman, and because of his value of not only women and not only those who weren't yet in the kingdom, and not only the fact that she is Samaritan, which was considered the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst, culturally, Jesus is put into a situation where even his own followers are like, man, what are you doing? Because Jesus is moved with something deeper. He's moved by a set of convictions. He's moved and showing us the way, and God, if I can say this, he's God in human form, and he is showing us what God is like, and then he's saying to us, if you really love me, if you really want to be my disciples, you have to follow me. And Jesus makes this very clear in a couple of passages of Scripture that I would like to read to you, that because of following Jesus, we too are going to be put into versus situations. Listen to this. Matthew chapter 5, verses 10 through 12. For those of you that have been in church long enough, or you've been reading and studying long enough, you know that this is the Sermon on the Mount, in which I personally believe is a collection of teachings put together that Jesus taught not just one time, but it was a theme or a series of teachings that he put out constantly. He said this: God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses you when people mock you, persecute you, and lie about you, and say all sorts of evil things against you because you are my what? Followers. This next part I don't get. I'd like to be there, just confessing I'm not. He says this: be happy about it. I think we would all go, wow, that's a tall order, to be happy about persecution. But then he goes on and he says this: for great is the reward that awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. Matthew chapter 10, which I really enjoy the book of Matthew, because Matthew, for us, we see these snippets of long teachings and long instructions that are given out to his followers. And then he sends them out, and then they come back and report back, and then they have another teaching series, and he sends them back out again. which is a great way of discipleship. And so in Matthew chapter 10, he's about to send his disciples out for the first time. And he says this, "Look, I am sending you out as sheep among wolves. So be shrewd as snakes and harmless as doves. But beware, for you will be handed over to courts, flogged with whips in the synagogues. You will stand trial before governors and kings because you are my followers. But this will be your opportunity to tell the rulers and unbelievers about me. And when you're arrested, don't worry about how to respond or what to say. God will give you the right words and at the right time. For it is not you who will be speaking, but will be the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. A brother will betray brother to death. A father will betray his own child. Children will rebel against their parents and cause them to be killed. And nations will hate you because you're my followers. But everyone who endures to the end," interesting phrase there, another sermon for another time, "will be persecuted in one town. When you are persecuted in one town, flee to the next. I tell you the truth, the Son of Man will return before he have reached all the towns of Israel." Now, this instruction, I often find it interesting that if Jesus was trying to give a pep talk, I don't know if I'd feel very peppy after this. Would you? Can't you just for one Sunday just laugh or I'm just playing? We wouldn't. This is hard news. And yet this is the news that I think is so desperate for us to understand right now, is that the ways of Jesus, following Jesus, is going to bring us to places of conflict. And that's one of the things that struck me. As you know, I'm a rocker. I love blues. I love some folk music. I love all of that stuff. And one day I was sitting in my office and I was just listening to Spotify because it's amazing. iTunes, not so much. But anyway, I was listening to Spotify. It was awesome. And I was listening to this band called Rival Sons. And I was hit and I was struck by this song that Tony sang called Shooting Stars. And I was hit that this really summarizes the series that I'm trying to bring forward, is that we know this. Our life is but a vapor. It is here for a moment and it's gone. This song calls us shooting stars. We're lighting up the sky for a moment and then we're gone. But yet we are to be what? Light to people's darkness. See, light and darkness collide. It's verses. My brothers and my sisters, when Jesus is on earth and he is instructing his disciples to follow him, he's letting us know that not only is he put into a versus situation, because we follow Jesus, we are going to be put into versus situations. It is inevitable. Is it not? Because if we claim to be people of love, that love is going to be met with opposition. It's going to be met with hate. And we don't have to think or use our imaginations for very long to realize the hate that is within our societies and our cultures, our medias, etc. Am I right with this? It doesn't take long to see this. What is our response to that? Capitulation? Are we to become people of hate? No. We're to become people of love. We're to be people who broker peace. We're to be open to people, loving people, caring for people. And so this series is going to delve into these deeper themes that we find in the life of Jesus. That he has said for us as followers of Jesus, we have no option but for these things to be our motivators as well as we follow him. And when we do that, we're going to be put in opposition with a lot of what culture throws at us. And so we have to be committed that, yes, my love, the love that I have been loved with, which is loved by Jesus, I am commanded to show that love, and that love has to be stronger than hate, right? Our light has to be stronger than darkness. Our faith has to be stronger than doubt. It has to be, because we are to be light in this darkness. There's a great story that I can use as an example of this. For sake of time, I'm not going to read the story, but you can go and you can read it. It's in Acts 19, and I've referred to this on several occasions because it's a very powerful moment, and there's a lot of teaching that we can pull out of this passage because it's so deep and there's so much happening here. But today I want to use it for the purpose of showing you exactly what this looks like. So Paul walks into Ephesus. Back then it would have been basically a scaled version of New York City. It was huge by standard of ancient cities. It had a lot going on. It was also the center of cultic worship of Artemis or Diana. A lot going on here. And Paul goes into the town, and he does as he normally does. He goes into synagogues. He begins teaching people. And as he's teaching people, people are starting to go, man, this life, this person Jesus that Paul is talking about is fantastic. It's a different way of living. It's a different way of orienting ourselves. It's a different way of operating within the world. And people started entering into relationship with Jesus and following him, to the point that the cults were even overrun by it, and people who were involved with cults and wizardry and witchcraft and all of those things were now taking all of their books and all of their stuff and burning them and turning towards Jesus. When you look at it, it actually says this, depending on the translation. Some of them keep it in an ancient format. New Living Translation puts it in a different format. But I want you to listen to the estimated number that it's saying here, as soon as I can find it. The estimated number of what was burned and destroyed was worth several $1 million. Something was happening. And then there were people who wanted to get in on it but didn't want to follow Jesus exactly. And so we have this incredible story about the 7 sons of Sceva going out trying to cast out demons. And while I feel bad that it happened for them, I also think it's a very funny story. So they go out and they say, hey, you demon, in the authority of Jesus, in whom Paul knows, we don't actually know him, but in whom Paul knows, I command you to get out of that guy. And what happens? They go, hey, I know Paul, and I know Jesus, but you, we don't know you. And those dudes were running out, beaten up, and naked. I think it's funny. But anyway, and because of that, and because of this other way of living, people started turning towards Jesus. People started living a different way, to the point of this. One of the idol makers, one of the people who were profiting off the cult and profiting off of what was taking place, actually got really upset, and he started a commotion in the city. And it says this: there was no small uprising. In other words, it was big. Uprising about the way. Because see, then they didn't even know what to call us. We were just called the people of the way. people who lived with a different set of values, a different understanding. They oriented themselves differently towards Jesus, and they moved forward and started following Jesus. Well, what was the result of that? They were put into a versus situation. They were put into a situation where they faced opposition. And we know statistically, we know through history that because they didn't cave in on principle, because they didn't say, okay, I understand what culture's saying, and I think we can still kind of maybe make Jesus fit this and that, and so they begin to compromise or shrink back. No, they didn't do that. They stayed strong. They stayed firm. And what happened? We know that 100 years later, Ephesus is reporting about 90% Jesus followers. This is an incredibly important example for us to realize that, yes, in following Jesus, we are going to face opposition. That opposition that we're facing is not because we've done something wrong, or we're saying something wrong, or we're living a way in which is wrong. Because, see, the world system is always going to be anti-Jesus. And we have to realize that I don't know how to bring it into our cultural context except to say, as I said a couple of sermon series ago, that there is only two kingdoms. One's light, one's dark. There's not middle ground. There's not a Switzerland kingdom, for those of you that know history. There's not. I wish there was at times, but there isn't. And the kingdom of light has to advance into darkness so that the darkness becomes clear. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about those things that Jesus operated, those values that Jesus operated, those values that he encouraged in us, that are so deep and profound that it made global and community impact. See, we talked last sermon series, and I told you this, the last teaching series was leading up to this point. We talked about our role in two communities, the faith community and our global community, and the communities that we live in that are not of faith. We live in these communities. There's nothing that we can do. We live in them. It's a reality. We can't escape that. And we're called to function a certain way in both of these communities. And so this sermon series is going to be focused upon us as an organization, us as people, moving forward with a certain set of values that Jesus operated in that we have to be strong in. Because my brothers and my sisters, it doesn't take long for us to realize that we have to stand strong. We have to be advocates of this way that Jesus showed us. Because right now, we see that our communities are polarized more than ever. We can't escape it. It's thrown in our face constantly. We are seeing the fact that we can't even disagree with conversations without it being an us and them mentality. What is dividing us is front and center versus what is uniting us. Those deep longings that our communities are wanting can only be found in Jesus. Do we believe that? Because, see, if we don't believe in the all-encompassing Jesus who says, come all are welcome. It doesn't matter your background. It doesn't matter your color. It doesn't matter your socioeconomic place in life. It doesn't matter the country that you've gone to. Everyone is welcome. And there's values that Jesus operated with that undergirded and shored up that message that we have been called to bring forward. And if you don't believe that that's the case, if you don't believe the hope that we found in Jesus is the answer, then I want to ask you to go read the Gospels. Go read the book of Mark. Go read the book of John. And look at the stories that are told. John works really hard at trying to show us Jesus in relationship. Here's a tidbit, a snippet for those of you who might engage in Mark. Mark was written to the Christians in Rome who was being persecuted after the Nero fires. And he's written it specifically to encourage us that even in the middle of opposition, Jesus is there and encouraging us. I think we should all refocus and move back to what we believe is true in our Anabaptist tradition. And what is that? That Jesus is the central figure. Jesus makes the difference. Jesus is God in the flesh amongst us. Jesus is the one in which we place our hopes. Jesus is the one in which we find our answers. Jesus is the one in which we find our peace. Jesus is the one in which we are motivated to love. Jesus is the one who has shown us mercy so that we can be mercy. Jesus is the light in darkness. And we have to choose. If we're going to say we're his disciples, we have to follow his example. We have to be stronger than the opposition against us. We have to be. All right. Wow. For those of you on live stream, if I didn't look at the light enough, I'm sorry. I love you. I miss you. It is so good to be back with you today. I'm going to pray now as the worship team comes forward. And I pray that you will continue to come and continue to really look and search down deep and grab a hold of these deep underlying truths that are foundational for those of us that call ourselves Jesus followers.